March 3rd, 2022. A historical comedy by the name of Our Flag Means Death releases its first 2 episodes on Crave and HBO Max. It has a simple premise. Set in 1717, the golden age of piracy, it follows wealthy landowner Stede Bonnet trying to find renown on the high seas as a pirate. It's cute. It's funny. But little did everyone know, this show was about to dramatically alter the lives of millions around the globe. Because Our Flag Means Death is not the only name it goes by. No, it goes by something else. The Gay Pirate Show. Our Flag Means Death, created by David Jenkins, took the world by storm for its portrayal of LGBTQ people. The show has not 1, not 2, but 3 canonical queer couples, one of them including a non-binary character, Jim, who has a separate plotline not involving their identity. It's revolutionary, which is also kind of sad. The show handles its queer themes with such care and normalcy that is rarely, if ever, seen in TV series, and it's really upsetting that this is all we need to praise a show, but that's a completely different conversation for another day. I'm here to talk about everyone's favorite pirate power couple, Ed and Stede. Ed and Stede outwardly are opposites. Edward is Blackbeard, the most infamous pirate in all of history. Draped in leather, he's the symbol of raw power and masculine energy. And Stede is Stede. He's a quirky, uptight aristocrat trying to find a place in the ruthless world of pirating, and it's going as well as you'd think. You would kind of expect them not to get along very well. But throughout the show, Ed and Stede bring out the best in one another, building a connection that allows them to unapologetically be themselves, something that hasn't been allowed before they met each other. And then everything goes to shit, but I'm getting ahead of myself. One of the main themes of the show is masculinity, more specifically how masculinity is interpreted in different environments. There's the upper class where Stede grew up, and there's the pirate world where Ed rose to fame. The archetypal paternal role expected of Stede doesn't suit him in the slightest, and while Ed fits right in with pirating, it's starting to take a toll on him. So, in this video, I'll be analyzing the various kinds of masculinity found in the universe of Our Flag Means Death, how those values affect our main characters, and how Ed and Stede eventually created their own definition of what it means to be a man. Part 1. Stede, Softness, and the Sea. Stede Bonnet was born extremely wealthy, like horribly, disgustingly rich. He inherited a great deal of land from his father, who we find out is not fond of Stede at all. Majority of his screen time is spent berating Stede, calling him soft and weak. Great parenting skills! These sentiments are shared by Nigel and Chauncey Badminton, old schoolmates of Stede's. In flashbacks, Stede was relentlessly bullied by the Badmintons and other boys for not fitting in with the rough habits of others, opting to pick flowers and read. This included name-calling, chasing him, and throwing rocks at him while strapped to a boat. All in good fun, though. Now both Badmintons grew up to be captains of the Royal Navy, the peak idyllic colonial life. They represent what Stede should be, what he never could be. A pillar of unwavering masculinity who leads men with ease. Something that Stede isn't for several reasons. But don't worry, the bully Stede agenda doesn't stop there. As Stede shows him around his captain quarters, Nigel continues to emasculate Stede at any chance he gets. He comments on the impracticality and ridiculousness of everything, including Stede's library, which he previously mentioned was his pride and joy. And even after Stede confesses that he is in fact a pirate, Nigel truly doesn't believe that someone like Stede could ever commit to such a lifestyle. Even his own crew plotted to kill Stede in the very first episode. Everyone sees him as a rich man in a midlife crisis playing pirates, and it seems like no one believes Stede could ever be a real pirate. Except Ed. After they meet, it's Ed who offers to teach Stede more about pirating in exchange for Stede's aristocratic knowledge. Hell, Ed openly compliments Stede's quarters in stark contrast to Nigel's reaction. Ed praises Stede for doing something different in the world of pirating, which begs the question,
why can't one be a gentleman and a pirate? A gentleman pirate?
It's something that Stede tackles through the series, trying to balance his own interests and desires with the cutthroat environment of piracy. And surprisingly, he does. He finds himself a niche, blending the traditional pirating ways with his own flair. And while it doesn't always work out well most of the time, he's doing it Stede's way, the only way he knows how to do it. Using theater to scare away merchants, creating a makeshift lighthouse to evade the Spanish with Ed, and going on treasure hunts. Even though Stede's way actively puts him in danger. In 10 episodes, Stede has been stabbed twice, hanged, held at gunpoint, and faced a firing squad. Despite this, he keeps going and grows into his own as a pirate captain. And then their ship gets surrounded by the English, and Ed and Steed are forced to serve 10 years in the Navy. It's short-lived, but their time spent together has made both of them so incredibly happy. In fact, Steed's been so happy, he almost forgot about his wife and kids. Yeah! Mary is Steed's wife, set up as an arranged marriage between their parents. It's clear from the very beginning that they have no chemistry at all. They're so unhappy, it's actually painful at times to watch. They both didn't choose this life, and while Mary tried her best to be content with the life they built, Steed completely shut down and fell into his fantasies. He's just not suited to be a father, and especially not suited to have a wife, because he's, you know. The title of episode 4, Discomfort in a Married State, is something that was actually said about the real Stede Bonnet in A General History of Pirates. Steed yearned for the sea, for an escape from his life that he didn't get to choose. There's a shot in episode 4 of Mary and Steed's graves that they got as wedding gifts, fading down into their dining room, signifying that they might as well be already dead. It's the same with Mary too. She loves her kids, but she's actively uncomfortable in the traditional matronly role. We see a better look at her being herself after Steed's disappearance, taking on an art career as the Widow Bonnet. In the first half of the show, Steed is constantly thinking of Mary and his kids in flashbacks and nightmares. It's clear his guilt for leaving them rightfully continues to haunt him. But after he meets Ed, Steed finally starts to feel alive. He stops hiding away, he cuts loose, and in the process, he finds himself. Part 2. Blackbeard, Bloodshed, and New Beginnings. Just as a preface, I think Edward Teach is one of the most interesting characters I've seen in a while. Taika Waititi's performance is so nuanced and rich, it's magic. Anyways, before we talk about Ed, we need to talk about Blackbeard. Everybody knows Blackbeard, the most infamous pirate in all of history. His reputation precedes him in real life and in the universe of Our Flag Means Death. He's told to be a bloodthirsty killer and the world's most brilliant tactician. In the first real look we get of him, he doesn't even have a face, just a cloud of thick black smoke above a towering, monstrous figure. When we do eventually see him in episode 3, his face is still obscured, adding to the mystery and legend that is Blackbeard. He's essentially a myth, a ghost. Edward Teach was raised in poverty, his mother working as a maid for wealthier families, and his father an abusive drunk. Great paternal figures so far. From a very young age, Ed believed that he wasn't worthy of fine things or softness. These sentiments are rooted in racism, since Ed is of Maori descent. We're shown in flashbacks of Ed's mother giving him a piece of red silk, saying,
"We're just not those kind of people. We never will be."
This instilled a sense of inferiority that has followed him his whole life. So, Ed crafted the hypermasculine persona of Blackbeard to shield himself from his hurt and longing for things he simply thought he wasn't allowed to have. When Steed and Ed first meet, Steed doesn't know that Ed is Blackbeard initially, so he introduces himself as Ed. Steed gives him an opportunity to not have the weight and expectations that the title carries. Steed allows him to simply be Ed. He finds a piece of cashmere and hesitantly brushes it against his face, unsure of what to do with himself at that moment.
Rather exquisite cashmere.
Do you fancy a fine fabric?
I think maybe I do.
This is the first time we see him properly drop his guard, even if it's just for a moment. After getting to know each other more, and after Steed finally finds out that Ed is in fact Blackbeard, he vents his frustration for what feels like the very first time. He's essentially given up on pirating, that this life has drained everything out of him. The act has become too much, and he's considering packing it all up. It's only until Steed and Ed work together to evade the Spanish that Ed decides to keep going with Steed. That he's found his second wind by literally stepping into Steed's shoes, not being Blackbeard for a single day, and doing something different than the usual heartless violence of piracy. At the end of episode 5, we get my favorite scene in the entire show so far. Earlier, Ed and Steed attended a formal party where both of them were ridiculed by the other guests, mostly because, of course, the party was filled with racist French aristocrats. Once they get back to the ship, Steed meets Ed under the moonlight and carefully folds Ed's red silk into his breast pocket and tells him that he wears fine things well. With this simple act, Steed tells Ed that his mother was wrong, that he is that kind of person, that he is deserving of softness and love. The silk isn't the only thing he brought with him from his childhood, though. Ed tells the crew a story of how he watched the infamous sea monster, the Kraken, kill his father, saying it's the only thing that he's scared of. We later learn in an emotional confession to Steed that it was Ed, in fact, who killed his father in a fit of rage, and that he actually hasn't killed anyone since, but was planning to kill Steed that night. He's scared of what he's capable of, referring to himself as the Kraken. To Ed's surprise, he's met with understanding from Steed, assuring him that he's Ed's friend and has a chance to feel his feelings and air out what's been trapped in him for so long. This is what I love so much about Edward Teach. He starts as Blackbeard, a faceless legend shrouded in darkness and violence. But as we learn more about him, Blackbeard becomes Edward, a man who loves marmalade and cashmere and was forced into a cycle of violence that seemed impossible to break. He always kept people at arm's length, but once Steed comes into his life, his walls that he built up over the decades are slowly broken down by this strange man who genuinely cares about him. We also get to see the opposite of Steed's relationship with Ed, with one Calico Jack. Ed and him are old friends from another pirate crew. He makes himself comfortable on Steed's ship, and we immediately see Ed's behavior change when he's with Jack. Calico Jack is like a college frat guy, but in pirate form. It's that kind of toxic masculinity that prioritizes pleasure and casual violence as entertainment, disregarding the feelings and discomfort of others. He acts on his impulses and isn't afraid to hurt people if it works in his favor. These traits rub off on Ed, and he becomes a completely different person that is pretty uncomfortable to watch. Don't worry though, Jack gets his shit rocked by a cannonball, so hopefully that's the last we see of him. Calico Jack clearly isn't good for Ed in the slightest and represents all of the worst parts of pirate culture. There's someone else that represents something adjacent to Calico Jack as well, and I am not excited to talk about him. Unfortunately, we need to talk about Izzy Hands. Listen, if you like Izzy Hands, that's great. He's a really interesting character that I can appreciate, but personally, I am not a fan of him at all. So, anyways, Izzy is Ed's first mate, and Izzy hates Steed from the moment they first meet in episode 2. He hates everything he stands for and is appalled when Ed takes a liking to him. Izzy resorts to plotting to murder Steed on several occasions, despite him being the source of Ed's happiness. It's jealousy, is what it is. Izzy acts as Ed's tether to Blackbeard. He represents the toxic masculinity that continues to force itself upon Ed, regardless of Ed's feelings or what he actually wants. This comes to a head after a series of unfortunate events when Steed leaves Ed waiting on a dock after they had kissed and planned to run away to China together. Fuck! Heartbroken, Ed returns to Steed's ship to mourn. He's completely undone by this. He doesn't know why Steed didn't meet him, so he falls apart. Izzy is very loyal to Blackbeard, but definitely not to Ed. So, of course, Izzy's next course of action is to berate Ed and provoke him until he throws away the red silk, finally snaps, and throws Lucius off the boat. Breakups! He thinks Steed didn't want Ed, so the only thing that's left for him to do is to fully embrace the Kraken. Izzy makes him believe that actually feeling his emotions and experiencing them to their fullest extent isn't worth it. That Ed isn't worth it. That it's better to channel that anger into pure violence. Shockingly, this kind of coping is not healthy at all, especially for Ed. As the last we see of him, he's curled up in the now completely empty captain's quarters, crying by himself, and it's so goddamn heartbreaking it makes me sick. Ed and Steed's relationship is so special. They work off each other in the best ways and understand each other unlike anyone else. They're incomplete without each other, and while it does sound a bit codependent, both of them have spent so much of their life alone, devoid of any meaningful connections. They're making up for lost time, making up for the decades of isolation since they found each other. It's incredible how these two complicated men had their lives completely upended so unexpectedly and grew into versions of themselves they never thought were even possible. Steed's ship, the Revenge, acts as a sort of safe haven for the assorted misfits and outcasts that make up the crew. There, they can let go of society's and piracy's worst traits and authentically be themselves. There are so many other characters that I haven't been able to talk about, like Jim, Olawande, Lucius, and Black Pete, who could honestly get all their own separate videos. This just goes to show how amazing Our Flag Means Death is and why so many queer people, including myself, have become attached to it. The first season ends with Ed completing his transformation into the Kraken and Steed rescuing his marooned crew. Who knows what's going to happen in the next season? We'll find out soon enough. I guess. Still can't wait much longer, though.